China has maintained a tough stance against corruption in 2017. 5 centrally administered officials have been put under investigation since the 19th CPC National Congress, as the CPC Central Commission for Discipline Inspection holds its second plenary session to outline the party's anti-corruption work in 2018. It sends a clear message that the party will build on the momentum and keep up pressure on corruption in the new year. To discuss the latest development in China's anti-graft campaign, in the first half of today's program, I'm joined in the studio by Zhao Miao, partner of Angia Law Firm. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Before we get started, let's take a look at this.
China's top anti-graft agency, the CPC Central Commission for Discipline Inspection, is holding its second plenary session from Thursday to Saturday. The Commission will further consolidate anti-corruption efforts and push a supervisory system reform. According to the CCDI, in 2017, more than 159,000 people were punished for graft or discipline violations, and at least 18 centrally administered officials were investigated. Besides the crackdown on corrupt officials at home, the anti-graft watchdog has also hunted corrupt officials hiding out abroad. By the end of last December, 3,866 fugitives had found themselves hunted down and captured from more than 90 countries, with nearly $1.5 billion recovered by police. In the report delivered to the 19th CPC National Congress in October, Xi Jinping, General Secretary of the CPC Central Committee, said new supervision commissions would be established across the country at various levels to provide a full inspection of public servants.
Welcome to Dialogue, Zhao Miao. What do you think are the issues of great urgency on top of the agenda for the new generation of leadership of the anti-corruption agency, the Central Disciplinary Commission? What do you think are the substantial issues here?
The substantial issue would still be to what level, to what scope we are going to carry forward the anti-corruption initiatives, whether we've already achieved enough and then we are going to less or relax on all the initiatives, or we are going to continue to strengthen the effort to curb corruption. I believe Mr. Xi's speech in this meeting will set the tone and also the plans for the coming years for the related work, both in terms of legislation and in terms of enforcement.
Then what do you think should be the major concerns of overseas observers who have been following the process of an anti-graft campaign under the communist leadership in China?
I guess the biggest doubt from the West world would potentially be they always believed in this checks and balance systems there, and they always have this very famous saying like power tends to corrupt, absolute power corrupt absolutely, and then they are struggling with, we are now having this system of within the party dominance. We are talking about this checks and balance system. We are talking about supervisory functions performing also within the party function, and then that actually is a big challenge to the Western world.
However, do you think that the Communist Party of China should be given a chance to walk its own way, to navigate its own course independently, instead of having the independence of the judiciary like in the West?
I would say yes, potentially. If we look at all the achievements we made in the past 30, 40 years, that kind of justify, at minimum, give the party a chance to walk its own way, to work it out. On the other side, that is also why there has been continuous reform or reformation on that front, both in terms of legislation and in terms of organization as well. I believe that's the effort trying to perfect the system.
The most powerful and clear signal and message that President Xi Jinping delivered to the whole of the Communist Party here is the disgraceful fall of General Fang Fenghui. He is head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He's been sent to the procurator organization on charges of corruption. What do you think of the implications?
That's pretty impressive, I would say. And in addition, he's probably holding the highest rank, and also he's actually doing his job. It's not like he's retired. And previously, there are speculations as to, when high-ranking officials they're holding the positions, it's less likely for them to be taken out by the anti-corruption forces. And now it actually shows and send out the message to the people that even if no matter how high-ranking such an official, how powerful he is, he's going to be, if he touches the red line, and he's going to be taken out.
It seems momentum will definitely be maintained to continue with the anti-graft campaign and the new generation of the leadership of the Central Discipline Inspection Commission, the top watchdog in the Communist Party of China. Thank you for being with us, and that's the first part of our program on anti-corruption campaign. I'll see you after the break. Stay with us, please. Welcome back. In a historic talk at the Panmunjom, South Korea, and the DPRK have agreed to ease military tensions on the Korean peninsula and try to resolve problems through pan-Korean dialogue. It was a radically different tone from the rhetoric of recent months, which has seen Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump trade personal insults and threats of war. But is the pan-Korean approach strong enough to bring the DPRK back to the negotiating table? How can the two sides of the Korean peninsula improve ties while separating the issue of the DPRK nuclear program? And what role will America play as the situation develops? In the second half of today's program, I'm joined in the studio by Wang Dong from Peking University and Rick Dunham from Tsinghua. We shall also cross over with Shin Ham, CGTN correspondent in Seoul, and Raphael Waber, AP reporter in Pyongyang. So, gentlemen, are you surprised that Mr. Kim Jong-un, leader of DPRK, agreed to send Olympic delegation to South Korea and joined this sports event to ease the diplomatic relations, the strained relationship, and they both agreed to address a number of issues on a wider range. What do you think of the agenda?
Well, I think first of all, as you just mentioned, this is truly quite a significant turning point in the North Korea sort of nuclear situation, and I think generally speaking, I think two observations I will make. First of all, I think any such kind of move toward peace and reconciliation between the two sides of the Korean peninsula should be welcome and should be encouraged. And secondly, we also should be realistic about what will unfold follow this. So I think there are at least two aspects we should be taking at the same time.
I'm not surprised for two reasons. One, both symbolically and substantively, getting together the two Koreas at the Olympics in South Korea sends a very strong symbolic signal of reconciliation. The second is Kim Jong-un likes sports, and his athletes will be right in the middle of it now. And I think that just like ping-pong diplomacy between the United States and China in the 1970s, sport can lead to true breakthroughs.
Isn't this move a little bit too dramatic when we are still recovering from the blast of the war game, as well as the shadow of, say, the brinksmanship between the United States and the DPRK? Do you think President Trump deserves credit for introducing the rapprochement?
Well, I think, to be fair, I personally believe the military deterrence strategy and the coercive diplomacy strategy the Trump administration has been employing up to now has been, I think, effective, and at least I think some credit would have to be given to the kind of military pressure that the United States has been putting on. But of course, the diplomatic initiatives, outreach coming from, I think, the South, and of course a lot of encouragement coming from the Chinese side as well. I think all those should be taken into account, and fortunately for us, so for now, all those positive momentum coming together and created this very positive momentum. Hopefully, I think it can last for...
We're going to wait to see whether this will be a game changer. But let's first of all cross over to our CGTN correspondent in Seoul, Mr. Shen Han. Hello.
Hi there.
What's the latest in Seoul about the historic event, the first of its kind in 2 years?
Well, we know that follow-up measures are being taken already. The Unification Ministry has said that working level talks will be held, of course, focusing on the DPRK's participation in Pyeongchang next month. We know the IOC is meeting on January 20th to finalize details of that plan. So what we're going to see, according to local reports, is working level dialogue at Panmunjom, led from the South Korean side by the Vice Culture Minister. He was one of actually the 5 delegates that were at those high-level meetings earlier this week. So we know there's a lot of attention to, of course, the DPRK's participation in the Olympics. This won't be the first time that the DPRK and ROK have used a major international sporting event to try and ease political tensions. In fact, I think if the two sides do decide to march in the opening ceremonies together, it'll be the 10th time they've done so. And of course, the results have been mixed thus far. But President Moon, he said that improving inter-Korean ties and denuclearization efforts should go simultaneously. So this talk about the Olympics, competing, marching under one flag sounds peaceful, but we'll have to wait and see whether it does actually lead to peace.
Spectators around the world will be watching out if the two delegations from the DPRK and South Korea would walk hand in hand. By the way, that's the theme song of the Seoul Olympic Games. Let me cross over to Raphael Waber, AP reporter in Panmunjom. What do you make of the dynamics in the DPRK? Do you think, once again, you'll see the driving force of the personality cult, who is the only decisive factor behind this process of rapprochement?
Two important things, I think. First of all, the DPRK last year, 2017, after its final, up till now, ICBM test at the end of November, declared that it has completed its state nuclear force. It says that its race to build up its deterrent has completed, and that puts it in a stronger position to reach out both to the south as well as other options of international diplomacy. So that's one thing. The other thing is that really this Winter Olympics is kind of an easy option. It's a way that, as one of your participants said earlier, ping-pong diplomacy, or using sports as an easy way to reach across the divide. So I think that the DPRK's agenda really hasn't changed. What it wants to see from the south of Korea is engagement on its own terms that harks back to the sunshine policy years of previous South Korean administrations, going back to the late 1990s, Kim Dae-jung, followed by Roh Moo-hun, and that is where the DPRK, as well as Koreans elsewhere on the peninsula, not only in the north but in the south, see the past century as a kind of disaster where foreign forces, Japanese occupation, followed by other interventions, the Korean War, they see Korea as being affected by intervention from abroad, and they want to emphasize in the north now, in particular, as in the past, they want to emphasize engagement between Koreans on the north and the south of the peninsula on their own terms, without the reference to, for example, the South's alliance with the US. Of course, for the DPRK, it doesn't have a strong ally as the South has in the US. The DPRK doesn't have a strong ally to do military exercises with. So all of this, I think, is an opportunity with the Olympic Games in the coming month, but the real difficulties will all start after the Olympic Games. That's assuming that everything goes smoothly for the Olympic Games. But basically, the DPRK from here, the agenda in Pyongyang is the same. It's feeling stronger with its nuclear deterrent and taking the chance to reach out to the south, and stressing that it waited for the opportunity of the DPRK leader Kim Jong-un's New Year address on the 1st of January to make this overture. And it's taking its lead from that, and hopefully will go forward with that Olympic Games participation, which is in itself quite amazing compared to the last Olympics in the South back in 1988, which the DPRK boycotted after months and years of negotiation with the International Olympic Committee and the authorities in the South. So in itself, it's an opportunity. It's amazing if it does go ahead, but really the big problems will come back again after the Olympics are over.
Yes, indeed, it's a good question. We see silver lining, but wonder if this is a wake-up call and a silver bullet to introduce a comprehensive thaw in the bilateral relationship, and also perhaps trilateral ties between Washington, Seoul, and Pyongyang. The issue, Dr. Wang Dong, is nuclear proliferation has been put under investigation and discussion of the UN Security Council and economic sanctions. The most severe of its kind have been imposed, with China and Russia being part of the alliance against the DPRK, which has been so isolated. Therefore, do you think this is the end of the beginning, or do you see most likely return of the comprehensive sanctions the moment the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games is over?
Well, I think it might be too soon to make the conclusion that it's the end of the beginning. At least I think we have to give the peace an opportunity, give peace a chance, and also give diplomacy a chance. But while, as I just emphasized, at the same time being very realistic about what the will unfold after the Olympic game will end.
The DPRK says it has become a nuclear-armed country, despite the refusal and defiance of the whole international society. The issue is, do you think this Olympic Games in ROK is a godsend gift to Pyongyang? It amounts to a strong understatement, like, yes, you have been accepted as a nuclear-armed power. The economic sanctions will lose its teeth. It will not be viewed very seriously by Pyongyang any longer.
I don't think we can take it that far. I think if this sends any message, it is that the international community would believe that Pyongyang is a legitimate government, that they are a legitimate state that can take part in international affairs. But I don't think that this sends any signal about the future of North Korea's nuclear program. I mean, I do think what you said is absolutely right. Kim Jong-un says that it is not negotiable, the future of the nuclear program, and he wants to negotiate on his own terms. He'd rather negotiate an end to the Korean War than have the discussion between the Chinese and the North Koreans, the Russians and the North Koreans, about denuclearization.
Let me go back to Shen Han, our CGTN correspondent in Seoul. Let's go back to what happened in 1962 when the Cuban Missile Crisis served as a game changer, and from that serious compromise that Mr. Khrushchev made, we had one decade of a detente between the Soviet Union and the United States, the two superpowers at the height of the Cold War. Do you believe after this war game that has lasted for quite a few months, because of the intercontinental ballistic missiles and nuclear tests, we're going to see a serious rapprochement? That's point number one of my question. Second is, we have never seen any serious signs of a panic, despite the war clouds that were gathering on the doorsteps of ROK. So what do you make of the dynamics of this process? Chen.
Well, if you talk to ordinary South Koreans, they've been living, the majority have been living with a divided peninsula for the rest of their lives. But I think if you look at just the past couple of days, the chief delegate for the DPRK at the high-level talks on Tuesday at Panmunjom in his closing statement said that the country's nuclear arsenal is not aimed at what he called his brethren, but actually at the United States. So if you read into what leader Kim Jong-un had said in his New Year's address, saying that he is willing, his country is willing to participate in the Olympics, yet they are still a nuclear power. What we're seeing is that the DPRK's policy is clear that it wants to deal with South Korea directly, bilaterally, and it wants to deal directly with the United States. It's not interested in either in multilateral forums, and of course the nuclear issue is not something that's negotiable, as someone mentioned there earlier. So where this leads to in terms of rapprochement after the Olympics is going to be the big question mark. The United States and South Korea had agreed to delay or not hold joint military drills during the Olympics or the Paralympic Games, so that would take us into April. So come springtime, we'll get a better idea of where the DPRK stands and where it wants to lead itself in the international community.
Let me get back to Raphael Warburg. The DPRK asked the military maneuvers, the joint ones between the RK and the United States, to be halted as a result of their proactive efforts to be involved in the Olympic Games in Pyeongchang, ROK. Now, do you think, again, my question is much the same. We are skeptical. We are watching out as to whether this will be the beginning of nuclear denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. Do you think it is likely for Mr. Kim Jong-un to conduct yet another missile test in the immediate aftermath of the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games?
DPRK has got a big army anniversary on February the 8th, just the day before the opening ceremony of the Winter Games is scheduled. But I think that at the moment, based on the DPRK's assertion that it's completed its nuclear force, and again, going back to the New Year's address from the DPRK leader, Kim Jong-un, in that he said that now their agenda is to mass produce nuclear warheads and missiles rather than test them. Back at the beginning of last year, 2017, in his New Year's address, he stressed that the DPRK was in the final stages of preparing its ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile, to test. So now it might not be so much the need to do a new missile test. It could be something different, like a satellite launch. That could happen any time. But I think that the agenda for the DPRK after the Olympics will be more to try to find its situation in terms of whether the engagement with the South continues and whether there's any chance of rapprochement not only with the South but newly with the US. And with that problem with America, really what the DPRK wants is reassurance and friendship, assurances of security. And if the US is willing to sit down and talk with the DPRK, again, the problem without the precondition of denuclearization at the start of talks, then that could be something that the DPRK is willing to do rather than further what neighboring countries in the US call provocations. That could be launches of missiles, tests of nuclear devices, or other demonstrations of its deterrence capability. But up till now, I think that really the DPRK is trying to establish itself in a position of strength and reach out to the South, and then going further, possibly if the US is willing, try to talk further to the US. But again, the problem is the denuclearization and whether the US will step forward and agree to that. The other kinds of issues or suggestions like from China and Russia.
Thank you so much. Thank you for our guest speakers in ROK and the DPRK for insightful analysis. Welcome back to the Beijing studio here. Do you believe, Rick, that the DPRK has emerged winning big in this war game after it's nuclear armed? And do you think what happens next will still be talk about talk, or something substantial will start to unfold? For example, the opening or reopening of the Kaesong Industrial Park.
Well, I definitely think that the government of North Korea has been the winner in the last few years. They've continued their development of the program.
Are you suggesting we have seriously underestimated the capability of Kim Jong-un? Young, by the age and the appearance, he's really capable of playing the Brinks machine?
The answer, yes. I mean, I think he has shown an ability to divide the opposition and to keep moving forward with his plan. And I do think there are possibilities, just like you said, the Kaesong plant. I think there's no reason that cannot be moved forward in bilateral talks with the South.
But in doing that, you're going to violate the UN Security Resolution of the economic sanctions.
Well, I think that the goal there would be to have broader talks where they could waive some of to show progress, so the United Nations would roll back some of the sanctions. I think that's the next plan.
Dr. Wang Dong, what do you think of the immediate response from the Chinese Foreign Ministry towards this reconciliation between the two Koreas?
Well, I think this is actually what China has been pushing for so many years, and what we have been hoping for, the North and the South coming together and talk about peace and reconciliation, and ideally gradually also moving.
But I'm afraid there's also this assumption that China will be left marginalized further in brokering any serious peace talks.
No, I actually don't look at it that way. I disagree with such kind of assessment. I think there's no issue of so-called China being marginalized, because after all, it is the North Korea, and mostly North Korea, the United States, and to the great extent South Korea. They hold the key, to this North Korean nuclear issue. It's not that between North Korea or China, but China is a very important stakeholder in pursuing the peace and denuclearization.
Do you see eye to eye with Dr. Wang Dong that the denuclearization issue is actually and will be a thorny issue between the United States and the DPRK? China refuses to be held hostage by their bilateral hostility and animosity. I think
it is going to be a permanently difficult issue, but it has to be put off if you're going to move forward, because North Korea is not going to roll back the nuclear program up front. And I think, just like we were talking about, the four nations that we've mentioned all have to have good communications with each other. Every single one of those relationships is important, as well as the multilateral, the trilateral, and the quadrilateral relationships.
What do you make of the sustainability, the fury and fire of President Trump? He's been talking tough.
It depends what morning, how he wakes up and what he tweets. I mean, I think that the U.S. policy from the State Department has been pretty consistent. The President says one thing one day, one thing another. At least today he said negotiations are good.
Perhaps time is up for the wins of the presidency, and we're going to do a book review about the fire and the fury.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you for being with us, and thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.